gathered for this event, physically dispersed and virtually constructed, let us take a moment to reflect the meaning of place, and doing so recognise the various traditional lands on which we do our business today. We acknowledge the elders, past, present and emerging, of all of the land we work and live on, and their ancestral spirits with gratitude and respect. Please feel free to steal the virtual acknowledgement of country. It's much harder to do it when you're all on different countries. So thank you very much for your time today. Thanks also, Sheila, for explaining a bit about who I am. It's all up there. I think it's mainly useful for you to know all of that so you can understand why should I listen to this lady. I have got a relatively long career now in sport and recreation, but I think for today it's particularly useful for you all to note the little yellow post-it note there that I started my sport and rec career as a swimming teacher, lifeguard and aqua aerobics instructor. So I kicked that off when I was at uni back in the 90s, and I worked at places like Brunswick Baths, North Melbourne Pool, Northcote and those kinds of things. So I do feel like I have grown up through the system and then basically went back to uni and stayed there forever. So I hope today will be really useful for you. I'm very happy for it to be interactive. I'll check in with Sheila every now and then if there are any questions coming up in the chat. So please do feel free to put questions in the chat as I go, and then we can go along the way. I'm also happy to take questions at the end. And I will try, I promise, to keep it not too academic for you. So today I'm going to start with a broad brushstroke of leadership styles. You're all here today because you're leaders in your organisations, and we're going to be talking about how we can lead and manage others, particularly through a time of change or a time of uncertainty. It's always useful, and again, I am a professor, so we do like to start with some theory to understand there are lots of different types of leadership styles. I've got about 10 on the screen for you there. There are more than that. There are a whole lot of people doing lots of research, learning about research and leadership, and these are some of the more common ones. So I'm going to take you slowly through these, but what I would like to make sure that you understand is that there's no real right or wrong style, that they are depending on what your personality and skill set is, the organisation or the context that you're in, and what your staff profile looks like. So we lean more towards one than the other, and I'll talk a little bit about where I see my leadership style, but I would really like to point out it's not like I'm going to finish today by saying, and this is the one you need to be. So the first one is the one that we call transformational leadership. And it's often considered among the most desirable for our employees because the people who show transformational leadership, we typically inspire staff through effective communication and by creating an environment of intellectual stimulation. However, these types of leaders are often very blue sky thinkers, and they may require people working underneath them who are more detailed oriented to make sure that the blue sky vision gets implemented. The next one is transactional leadership, and transactional leadership is focused on a group organisation where we have a clear chain of command and more of a carrot and stick approach to management activities. It's called transactional because effectively what we're looking at with this type of leadership is an exchange. You get a reward for good behaviour or good performance, and you get punished for bad practice. So this can be a leadership style that's effective for short-term tasks, but it's really unlikely to help people reach their full creative potential in this type of leadership style. One that you might be less familiar with is servant leadership, and people who practice servant leadership prefer power sharing models of authority. So we prioritise the needs of the team and encourage collective decision making. It can really work with diverse groups and it can boost morale. However, sometimes it can be seen that these types of leaders lack authority, and at times they would put the employees ahead of the business objectives, and in different contexts that might not be what that business needs at that point in time. So autocratic leadership is one of the ones that we don't see as much anymore, and it's the very extreme version of transactional. So it's significant control over staff. what we see autocratic leadership really in areas like military, where there is a command and control way of managing people. So you don't have time to discuss, you don't have time to engage, that I say you go and you go. So we don't see this often in service industries such as sport and active recreation or the leisure area, but we do still see it in some areas. Laissez-faire leadership is one of those types of leadership that as an employee we often think we would like, but when we've experienced it, it's not so fun. And it literally means let them do in French. So what that means is a hands-off approach. We just let the employees get on with the tasks as they see fit. This approach is really effective in creative jobs or in workplaces where you've got a very experienced staff team. However, we still do need leaders to monitor performance and communicate expectations to make sure that everyone understands what they are needing to do, even with a hands-off approach. Democratic leadership exactly means what it says. It's participatory. So leaders ask for input from team members before making a final decision. Workers under a democratic leadership often report high levels of job satisfaction. However, again, it's quite slow to make decisions. So if you imagine every decision in your organisation, everyone got to vote on it, that would take a longer period of time. And to be honest, some decisions really don't need a vote. They're pretty self-evident. So I think that, again, we can bring some of these leadership processes in without necessarily having that as the overarching leadership style. Bureaucratic leadership often gets a bad name. We think of bureaucracy as something that's annoying or that we have to work around. But really, bureaucratic leadership means it's an area that's highly regulated or administrative. So there's lots of rules and a defined hierarchy. Now, again, in some roles, such as risk management or health and safety, I absolutely want a bureaucratic leader. I want someone who is making sure that we are following the rules and keeping people safe. But if we're trying to create innovation or creativity or in a fast-paced changing environment, that might be more tricky to be the leadership style that organisation needs. So I hope what you're getting through that as I work through them is there are different leaders for different contexts and different styles that work. There's no one size fits all. Charismatic leadership often overlaps with transformational leadership. Both of those styles rely heavily on the positive charm and personality of that leader. So they're the leaders that we find ourselves drawn to. It's often, though, charismatic leadership is considered a little bit less favourable, because if the leader's not there, the projects are less likely or the work is less likely to succeed. So a transformational leadership builds that confidence in their team, meaning that if they move on or if they're not there, that work can still continue to a really high level and work really well. Whereas a charismatic leader is relying on them being there as that charismatic leader. So you can see where the transformational leader would arguably have that charisma and people wanting to follow them, but you still need to build that team up behind you. Situational leadership is a really interesting one, and that is basically saying that we use lots of different leadership styles depending on the situation that we're in. So a situational leader may use a democratic approach when making a commercial direction decision or a strategy meeting with senior executives, but then switch to a much more bureaucratic strategy when talking about risk and OH&S. So many people, though, do have a natural leadership style that we kind of fall into, and that can make this situational leadership challenging, because what we're trying to do is we're performing something that we might not necessarily naturally feel. Which brings me to my last one. And if you had to ask me, this is probably the leadership style that I most relate to, which is authentic leadership. So authentic leadership is an approach to leadership that emphasises building your legitimacy as a leader through honest relationships with your followers, which values their inputs and are built on an ethical foundation. Examples of authentic leadership that I can share with you are things like, if you could see my camera on most of my staff meetings with my team, so I've got a team of about 70 staff in my department. My son regularly popped up when we were doing schooling at home. Cats walk across the table. I run out of meetings to answer the doorbell because that is who I am. I'm not going to pretend I don't have a child. I'm not going to pretend we're not working from home. And I think authenticity can help people also be the best version of themselves and also acknowledge their problems. So when I became president of Tennis Victoria, I met with the staff team and I told them a bit about myself because I thought it was important that they knew who this person was. What I did also talk about was that I get anxious every now and then. I'm a bit tightly wound. And I think, again, you don't often realise as a leader the things that you share in an authentic way can be transformational for other people. So I actually had a senior manager at TV tell me that that was really nice for them to hear, that someone that they thought was super capable and confident still has moments where they get a bit wobbly. It made her feel much better about her experience as an emerging leader. So those levels of authenticity can empower people rather than showing weakness. Now, that's the really long theoretical bit. Sheila, I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Emma, not at this stage, but it's a great reminder. If there are any comments or questions from our listeners, please pop them into the question chat line. There's no silly questions at all. Thanks, Em.
Sheila. All right, I will keep ticking along. All right, next slide. So the focus of today, though, really now is about leadership in uncertainty. What we want is strong leadership in uncertain times. And I have joked more than once this year that 2020, really, we need to switch it off, unplug it, and switch it back on again to see if we can fix it. It has been an incredibly challenging year. We started with bushfires and that felt bad enough. And now here we are 6 months on in a global pandemic and in a Black Lives Matter rioting in a number of countries. There's a whole lot of stuff coming on at the moment that really does feel very uncertain and for some people really quite scary. And strong leadership is essential in these times, and it's hard. Leadership in a time of uncertainty is not easy. We really do need to be the best version of ourselves for our staff and really lead. There was a recent study in Forbes magazine which provided a really simple example of what leadership looks like in the midst of a challenge. So when you think about getting on an aeroplane and sometimes there's some turbulence, the pilot will come on and say, ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're going to be experiencing some bumps up ahead. So I've asked the flight attendants to take their seats, discontinue service until we get through this. So what that captain is doing is letting us know that things are going to change. They're going to be a bit bumpy, and there is something we can do. We can put our seatbelts on and prepare. So when the bumps do come, even if they're big and scary, we know we feel okay because we've had a heads up, and we know that the pilot and the crew are aware of the situation. What is scary on a plane is when you hit turbulence and no one's told you it's coming. Because if the pilot says nothing or doesn't address that it is on the way, then it's a bit more of a shock and a bit more scared. So during times like this, as a leader, we want to be that pilot that says to people, it's bumpy. We know that this is a difficult time for you, and here's what you can do. So what we're really doing as a leader in a time of uncertainty is we're helping people navigate, we're managing, and we're complicated at the current frame with distance. So what we mean by that is we're navigating for ourselves and for our team the stresses, the challenges and the fears. And I really do want to reinforce that it is ourselves as well as our team. We are people. We're not just workers. We're not just leaders. We are people who really, our staff, our colleagues are relying on us to be human in these environments. So we are navigating this for ourselves. We're also needing to manage diverse people, the dynamics between them, priorities and changes. I'm sure for many of you, there's been some real serious impacts on your staff team. Some of them may have lost their work. Some of them may have had partners who've lost their jobs or schooling from home responsibilities, which has been incredibly challenging. You may also, though, yourself or others you know, may actually be really flourishing in this time. Now, it might be my industry, so academics were a bit outlier type personalities at the best of times. I've got a handful of staff that are absolutely flourishing right now because they can be at home, they can shut their door and no one can really talk to them. So they're living their best life right now. So it's really different for different people, and I think the pace of change is something that we really need to manage. And in this particular situation, exactly what I'm doing today is, this time last year, you wouldn't have imagined having these video professional development sessions. We would have been in a room somewhere. Someone might have dialed in, but really we did a whole lot of stuff face to face. Our big complicating factor as leaders now is distance. We're communicating with and interacting with our teams in virtual environments. And for your industry in particular, you're now moving into a transition back to the facilities. And managing that is also going to require navigation and management, and who gets to come back and when and how. So that idea of us all working together but removed has been one of the really big challenges of this current work and time of uncertainty. But what I do think we need to understand is also a lot of this is going to continue. We won't go back to normal because normal wasn't necessarily great for everybody. So I think what we can do as actions, as leaders in these uncertain times, is understand that some of this will actually change how we work moving forward. But there are some really clear actions for leaders in these times that we can take. So here's I guess, your takeaways of what you can do. And what I'd like to say is it feels like the uncertain times are easing, but there will be different and future uncertain times. So hopefully this is useful to help for nows, but also moving forward. You've all heard of the aeroplane analogy, put your own oxygen mask first before you help others. That is absolutely the same when you're a leader. If you're going to lead others through a time of stress, fear and uncertainty, it's essential that you manage your own experience of all of this as best you can. You need to have self-care and stress management practices because people are counting on you. But it's also extra important that you double down on taking care of yourself first, not because you're being selfish, but because you need to be able to be there for others. So really do take good care of yourself. Says the pot to the kettle. I'm not very good at it either, but I do think that this is one of the things we can do. The other thing we really need to do as leaders in times of uncertainty is communicate constantly. A lot of people are quite freaked out, and that's understandable. And when things are stressful and uncertain, a lot of people go to the worst case scenario in their minds, and then it's very hard to get them out of that spiral. And when people are in that space, you're not going to be able to get much useful work or engagement out of them. What we can do, though, is communicate what we do know and how we are truly feeling. So the more openly we communicate, the less likely the people are to start to make up scenarios of what they think will happen. I do also think, and that goes to the last dot point, we do need to be authentic that this is what I know now. That doesn't mean it's not going to change tomorrow. Because I think at the moment, for my leadership team, we're meeting daily in like a whip meeting, because stuff is changing so quickly. So that constant communication can feel like overkill, but it just really helps people feel that you're not hiding anything from them and that you're aware of the uncertainty and how and what you're doing. I know you would already all be doing this, but checking with people on a personal level. Work and life still goes on, but they're also people, and it's been a really hard time for a lot of people. For people with children, it's been very hard having the kids at home for 11 and 12 weeks. For people with caring responsibilities, for parents or elders, that's been incredibly difficult. Some people's partners losing jobs, staff who live on their own would have been very, very isolated. So as well as talking about the work, where appropriate and in your way, because everyone has a different way of doing it, just do check in with people on a personal level to make sure that you're aware of how you can best work with them. A key in uncertain times, and this will be particularly important now as you're all moving back into an environment where you're working towards being back in your facilities and back delivering a range of services, is we need to be flexible and nimble. So it's important to remember that you and everyone else in our area has never been in this environment before. There's no playbook or no rule book. We're all just doing the best we can. And sometimes the things we do won't quite work and we'll have to adjust, both in a real sense, i.e. the booking system didn't go as according to plan and I couldn't get people out of the pool, or in a leadership sense. So what we have to do is acknowledge that we are just doing our best and we're being flexible and that we will change things. And a good way of thinking about that is an area called, and some of you might already be aware of it, about a growth mindset, which means that you have to be willing to fail and that failure is a learning experience which makes you better. The more we can have that growth mindset of I didn't do it right this time, but it's going to be better, I'm going to keep trying, that flexibility is really going to be important as we figure out what the new normal looks like. And again, I think the last one, and this is particularly important for me as a leader, is that idea of being real and authentic. Your team doesn't need you or expect you to be superhuman or perfect. They want you to be real. They want you to know if you're having a bad time, not in an oversharing way, but in a human way. And that provides a sense of psychological safety for your team that they can also then let you know what they need from you. An example I can give you for that I had to do was my husband is an intensive care nurse at Royal Melbourne Hospital. So when this all kicked off, we weren't sure what it meant for him. My son and I moved to my country farm where my mum and dad still live, where I grew up, so that my husband could safely get to and from work and had a safe environment to return home to, so we didn't have to go somewhere else and isolate from us. I sent a message to all of my staff saying, I'm going to be offline for a couple of days because I'm driving the 5 hours up to the family farm and I'm not going to be the best version of myself for the next 48 hours because this is rough. I'm leaving my husband behind. I don't know how long for. The world's collapsing around me. I didn't go overboard in crying on anyone's shoulder, but by signalling you're not going to get a response from me for 48 hours and here is why, those staff were appreciative of my setting boundaries to cope during a really difficult time. And again, it meant that I had much more genuine engagement from those staff who were also having difficulties because I had role modelled that it was okay to acknowledge that stuff was really hard. This was at the very start of the lockdown when no one quite knew how bad it was going to get. Sheila, happy to pause if there's questions or I can keep charging along.
It's such a refreshing and honest advice, and reminders to all of us, particularly the keeping it real aspect. I think it's timely. I'd love to know and understand what's been your key learning about leading in a time of such turbulence.
Yeah, so I think my key learning has been that human element. And often in business as usual environments, we can feel like we are just focused on tasks and achieving strategies and KPIs, and then the human stuff is just a value add. I think in a time of uncertainty or crisis, that human element is what keeps the wheels on the bus so we can keep going forward. Because it gave people, the term that I used before is psychological safety. This is incredibly difficult time, and I do think that idea of being real, and it's not the same conversation with my staff as I would have with my best friend or my mum or my husband. It's a different discussion, but acknowledging that it is different for everybody and that I'm going to be here to support you, but I am still human and here's how we're going, has been really important. Particularly in my area I have a lot of staff with young children. Working from home, I'm not sure if you can see me on the screen at the moment, but I have a virtual background. So you can't see my lounge room. My son's most favourite thing, I have a 9-year-old boy, his most favourite thing to do was to sneak into my meetings and magically appear through my virtual background and wave at everyone and then disappear again. My staff loved that. That became a highlight of team meetings of when would Will appear through the virtual background. So I think, again, adding that sense of fun and normalcy, it made them feel better when their dog barked or their cat walked across the screen or a kid screamed in the background and all of those kinds of things. So I think providing a human element and that psychological safety is really, really essential.
Yeah, thanks, Emma. That's it's such an honest response, and such a great reminder to us all, because no matter how experienced we are or inexperienced, we are human, and it's really, really important to be reminded of that. And thank you for that response.
Thank you. So there are actions of what we can do as leaders. I think it's also, I'm just going to click to the next screen. It's also about how we can manage others. And again, a lot of this you would already know. I'm sure there's lots of experienced leaders in the room. But to be successful as a leader, all of the evidence and all of the research suggests that you need to be trusted and respected by your team. And the key point, I think, is the one in the bracket, which is not necessarily liked. And I know as a woman, there's lots of research on that women often struggle with the being liked aspect of leadership, but trust and respect is key. And I do think it's also really important to remember that our team members are all different. Not everyone thinks the same, and that this is a good thing. So during a time of crisis or a time of uncertainty, everyone's experience is different. So for some, they might be flourishing. For others, it's been a time of significant stress. And particularly, again, in your industry, you've got people who are childcare workers, you've got people who are personal trainers, you've got your swimming teachers, your lifeguards, your CEOs and leadership teams. You've got a whole lot of different staff who their world has been turned upside down in a whole variety of different ways. And some might have a side hustle that they can do, or that they would be business as usual. And for others, it's been a time of significant stress. So just understanding that diversity of teams, their experiences, is a really important skill for any leader. And I think that's probably what I'll continue on to discuss in more detail now. So managing diversity can be complex. Now, I do a lot of my research and work on diversity and inclusion and access and equity. So I know that there is a lot of research evidence that says diverse teams can result in higher outcomes, but academics will always put a but on the end. It's complex. So each of the things I'm about to talk to in this particular slide can be an area of strength, but also has potential to be problematic. And what I mean by that is that we have differences in how we understand things, differences of opinion and differences of experience. We have challenges and opportunities around team cohesion. So how do we bring people together in a team where we are quite different? We need to make sure that people can collaborate. I'm going to throw another big academic word out there, is intersectionality. So there's no such thing as just one type of person, that you can be a woman who is Aboriginal and same-sex attracted, that you are three things, or you can be a straight white man who went to a public school in a very low SES family. All of those different parts of the person create that diversity. So we're not just looking at men and women or culturally and linguistically diverse people and Anglo-Australians, that no one's just one thing. And then the word bias. And often when we think of bias, we think of it as a very negative thing. It exists. What we need to acknowledge is that we all have unconscious bias, and how we can ensure that we make decisions and lead in a way that addresses those unconscious biases. So as I said, each of these areas can be a potential strength, and that's what research suggests, that diverse teams, particularly that diversity of experience and diversity of thought, can be really great, but it can be problematic. And I guess what we really need to understand is that successful teams require a few things. One of them is that we need the people to identify as a team. So even though they're all different, we need to understand how we can create a culture in our group of we are one team, or we are one organisation, having people proud to be part of that organisation and work together. So there's a lot of that in sport teams that we understand, of how we work on a teams within teams approach or a leading teams approach, but we also need that in our organisations. But other things that can really ensure that diversity in our team results in success rather than in just problems is a whole lot of successful things here that I can help talk you through. So really clear structures and processes around feedback can absolutely help with managing diverse teams. Now that sounds boring and performance reviewy, but really what I'm talking about there is making sure that everyone has a voice and how people can use their voice in a way that is respectful and constructive to manage those differences. So what we're talking about there is that everyone gets the opportunity to have a seat at the table, be part of a discussion, or to point out, you know, when you made that decision about what was going to be easier for this group, that actually made it incredibly difficult for this group that we're trying to get involved over here. So we need to make sure that there are ways that we can get feedback, and that's not just feedback from our staff, it's feedback from our clients and our stakeholders and our funders, people who we aren't getting in the door. So research can be part of that, anonymous feedback surveys, staff climate surveys, all of those kinds of things. But what you want to provide is structures and processes where people can comment and feedback on decisions being made, and that you can do it in a way which is respectful and constructive. Another part of that skill set that we need as leaders, and we can also engender in our teams, is conflict management. And the best way I can explain that is, again, a personal anecdote. My family is from a very strong political background. My husband's is not. So I spent the first few years of my relationship with my husband explaining that an argument is not a fight. So again, oversharing there, but an argument has rules of engagement and respectful, and you can have very clear differences of opinion, but there's a way of debating the idea. A fight is calling someone a mean name or completely disregarding them as a person. So that idea of conflict management skills is being able to manage situations where there are differences in how people understand things, or differences of opinion or differences of experience, and make sure that they can communicate with each other without it becoming conflict, because we want to harness the good and mitigate any potential problems. And there are lots of ways we can do that, and I'm sure that you've all got access to these through your different organisations, but unconscious bias training is probably the easiest one, of helping you and your team understand what unconscious biases you bring to the workplace. What that means is, when we talk about team cohesion and team identification, as humans, we like to hang out with people who are like us. That's just human nature. So what we're trying to do with diverse teams is make us work together in a way which people who don't think the same or haven't got the same background, and that inherently will create conflict. And what we want is to make that positive conflict around active listening and communication skills and empathy, not this person's wrong, they don't understand what I'm saying. Obviously, that feeds into things like emotional intelligence and self-awareness, so being very self-aware. So again, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys are all here listening to how to manage diverse teams in a time of uncertainty, so you're already taking those first steps of educating and learning and engaging in discussions about what it is to be a good leader. But that idea about being emotionally intelligent and having empathy, that not everyone's experience is like yours. And a good example of that I can give you is things like, we often talk about mentoring. So we have women's mentoring programs, or we have mentoring programs for diverse communities. But realistically, the reason people get the steps up the ladder that we would like them to see is not mentoring, it's sponsoring, which is that thing that happens when you go, oh, I know the perfect person for that job. Why don't you ask Sheila if she'd like to take that speaking presentation opportunity? Or, you know what, that'd be a great project for Barry. I'm just making names up now. So it's that sort of thing where we can use our emotional intelligence to stretch ourselves and our teams, and have a think about critically, why am I hiring this type of person? What am I looking for? Did I look for people who were different to what have been previously Did I make sure that I really was making the decision on the best person rather than the people that look like everybody else? And what I mean by look like is not necessarily literally look like, but as in we've always had this type of person, so that's worked, so let's keep going. And even simple things like handling social events, social events and holidays for different religions, things like doing an acknowledgement of country, a whole lot of simple things we can do with empathy and emotional intelligence. Communication skills are obviously key, and I do think, again, my final take home would be that communication is key. Respectful and as honest as you can be communication is a key to being a good leader. And what I mean by as honest as you can is sometimes you will be privy to information that you cannot share. But what you can do is you can say to people, this is what I can share with you now. So you're acknowledging that you can't share everything. And what that also signals then is that if they share something with you, that you will also keep their confidence if needed. So I do think that communication, so active listening and bring your empathy in, these are teachable and learnable skills. Some people are more naturally communicative or naturally empathetic. That doesn't mean that you can't teach it. And then I think the last one, which is something that we're only really getting our heads around now, because we've got emotional intelligence and we've got, brain intelligence, but cultural intelligence. So being aware of the cultural communities that your workers come from, or your community that your organisation works in or works with, making sure that you're aware of the things that can be hurtful or misconstrued, and not be that person who's like, I'm sorry I caused you offence, I didn't realise. So doing the work, and there's great organisations like the Centre for Multicultural Youth, for example, or the intercultural leadership groups where we do lots of training around how to engage with others. So I've had a really lovely opportunity through the Intercultural Foundation to do iftar dinners with Muslim families. I wouldn't normally have an iftar dinner because I'm not from that background, but breaking bread literally with people can really provide an opportunity to learn about cultural difference and create cultural intelligence. And again, depending on where your organisation is, there'll be different cultures. So in some areas of Southeast Melbourne, it might be a very strong requirement to understand Jewish communities. The northern suburbs might be much more around Muslim communities, or just multicultural more broadly. The differences between regional and metro, all those different things help us be the best version of the leaders we can, and helps us manage our diverse teams, because diverse teams can be strong and can be amazing, but we need to work at them. Now, I think that's more than enough for me, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen, if that's okay, Sheila.
Yes, of course. You can stay on as long as you want, though, Emma.
Thank you. And now you can see my virtual background, but my child is at school, so he won't appear, I promise.
Amazing. And we saw it before. It pops. It's a really great background. Can I just have talk a little bit about the environments that the majority of us operate in? Regarding pulling your team together and getting focused quickly in the moment, we can be tough, but we do have to do it at times. What's your thoughts and advice or key advice around taking advantage of the urgency?
Yeah, so I think, and I'm a bit of a silver lining cup half full person, so I think that although this time of uncertainty has been incredibly challenging, it has also created opportunity. And we've been able to do things in a lot of our different environments at a pace that we could never have got away with in any other time. So I think that we have a willingness from our teams to be available and to be responsive. And I really do think that we can get people engaged, and they genuinely want to be engaged. Examples are exactly like the things that you're running at the moment, Sheila. It's those ideas that we never used to run online professional development training, and now we do. We've had the same in the university sector, where we've always run research seminars. A dozen people would turn up. We've moved them to an online environment. We now have 30 or 40 people turning up, because what we didn't realise is we were actually excluding people who couldn't get into the room. because they either had caring responsibilities or it wasn't their day in the office, or, you know, that there was access and things like that. So I think what we can now do is really provide a whole lot of opportunities for people to engage in ways that we couldn't necessarily do so in a regular environment where we're all in the building. Around taking advantage of the urgency, it's looking at those, how are we able to get people in the room? Now, the issue is now virtual rooms. Moving forward for the next few months, it'll be a hybrid of virtual and real. But how can we take advantage of this urgency to create the change that we want to see and not just be reactive? Absolutely, we were reactive for a few months. I think now everything's slowing and we're moving back to a rebuilding phase. There's still a level of urgency, but what I would caution is that we use that urgency to make it better than it was. So there's been a really, I know our Prime Minister used a term called snap back for a while. There's been a whole push to talk about snapping forward. So let's not just go back to the way it was, let's snap forward to a better version.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I'm just going to give a bit of a shout out to Todd Foster. It's been a while since I've seen you, mate. Good to see you online. Todd's actually got a question for you, Emma. Bertzorg, excuse my pronunciation, possibly stated the notion of self-directed teams, humanity over bureaucracy. Do you think, Emma, self-directed teams would work in a pandemic or have any advantage during uncertainty?
To be honest, yes, because they have. So we're one of the silver lining things from this process, and I'm not a terribly directive manager, so I never required presenteeism because I wasn't always present anyway. I have a young child and other responsibilities. But I do absolutely think that being remote like this, we have had to become more self-directed because you're not there with someone looking over your shoulder. And I think what we've learned through this, and for some managers this would have been a much steeper learning curve or a bit more challenging than others, is that our teams they want to work, they want to do good work. And if we put some trust and some scale, I want to put scope around it, but if we put trust in our people that they will continue to do the work and at times will do more than we would have ever asked of them. So I do think one of the things that we've learned through this process is that we don't, now obviously you want your lifeguard to be at poolside, so don't get me wrong, we need some people in their place of work at a fixed period of time. Same with my husband in the hospital. I don't want him working from home in an intensive care nurse facility. But for a whole lot of people, that idea of being self-directed, this has taught us that we can trust people and we should have always trusted them. So that teams within teams approach of leadership, I think, is an excellent thing for us to snap forward.
Yeah, great question and even greater response, Emma. Look, I'm conscious of time, but I do have one more question I'd love to ask, if that's all right. Back to you, I guess. Which of your leadership attributes have been the most valuable during this time?
I've got a serious answer and an amusing answer, and I'll go with the amusing answer first. My amusing answer is that I have quite a dark sense of humour, and it has really worked in this environment where it does honestly feel like, you know, I'm pretty sure the zombie apocalypse is coming in July. There's not much more that can go wrong this year. So being able to see those moments of humour in what is a quite terrible situation. So we would have a war room whip meeting on a Thursday morning, and at the end of the meeting someone would go, "Happy Friday," because it was, you know, it's not happy and we've just had a horrible conversation. It's been really hard, but being able to boost people up. So I do think that sense of humour has helped me be a better version of myself for my team, in that what you don't want, I guess, as a team member is to have a leader who's just basically a bit like Eeyore out of Winnie the Pooh talking about how bad everything is, because even though it has been incredibly challenging, it's not been all bad. So I do think having an innate ability to try and see the light and the good has been really helpful. More seriously, though, I do think it was, and this is a nice takeaway for you all, I guess, that I've studied leadership in my roles and done professional development, that I understood some of the things I've spoken about today. Is this is what people need from their leaders. So how can I bring trust? How can I bring a level of certainty in an uncertain time? How can I use my communication skills, and pivoting that to the non-face-to-face environment? So I think having experience in professional development and going, okay, I know communication is going to be really key to all my staff. So all I had to do was think about how to pivot that into this environment. So setting up a Teams page, having lots of channels. One of the first things I did was with that communication is we set up a Teams channel called a virtual coffee machine, because a lot of stuff happens at the coffee machine at work. You know, people talk about things and update each other. So that became the spot where people could put photos of their kids up, or hilarious memes, or share news articles and those kinds of things. So understanding those key foundations of good leadership really were really valuable, because then all I had to do was figure out how to do it in a new environment rather than figure out how to do it from scratch. That was a long answer, sorry.
No, and an absolutely wonderful one. It was balanced so well. I too am partial to some dark humour, as a few of us are, and I think, you know, keeping it real and just having some light humour is so important, because it's something that we all have to live with together, and it's something that is unavoidable, unfortunately. Emma, you're so experienced and you're so real. This was such a valuable session. Thank you so much for not only giving us your time, but your insight and your honesty and your guidance. I would ask if there is any further support around research or resources that you could advise. Please let me know, and then I'll let our people know, because I think it's so important what we've covered today. And as we said earlier, this video is available will be available on the webpage, but more support the better. So Emma, thank you again. I think that the chat line is pretty quiet at the moment. I think there's a lot of reflection going on, and there's a lot of things to think about. So I think we might leave that there. Emma, and thank you so much.
No, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity, everybody. It's been great.
Amazing. Cheers. So as we thank Emma and we continue to look forward, we have upcoming our next session for the management and leadership stream. We have the remarkable Nathan Burke, who is the senior coach at Western Bulldogs for the AFLW team, and also high performance and leadership expert. He will be dropping by on Thursday the 18th to run a session on culture and values. A lot of experience he brings from not only the high performance background, but also his teaching background, and just a really, really great guy. So please look to attend that. As we've also said, if there's any further questions that you do have, if you need any more support around this topic or anything in general, please reach out to us. We thank you so much for your support ongoing in this time. A reminder, we are here for you, and we have a lot to give, and we will continue to do that moving forward, obviously. So thank you so much for your time and contribution today. I'm sure everybody's found this very, very insightful. I have dropped into the line a reminder about our final sessions in this series ahead. And also we do obviously have a lot of other PD opportunities available at Life Saving Victoria as well. But best wishes to you all. Take care of yourself and each other, and have a great day. Thanks, everybody.